I'm going to be talking to Keren Perla, who is the Director, Energy Futures Policy Collaborative at the Energy Futures Lab, about a new report titled Same Game, New Rules, How Policy Can Unlock Future Fit Innovation in Alberta's Hydrocarbon Sector. So welcome to the interview, Keren.
Thank you, Markham. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Now, we at Energy Media have been banging on for years now about how bitumen can be turned into other products like carbon fiber, asphalt binder, activated carbon, but make materials out of it instead of burning it. Is that basically what future fit hydrocarbons are about?
Absolutely. It's really about, we use the term future fit hydrocarbons at the Energy Futures Lab really to kind of capture what we see as that next frontier of the oil and gas sector, where we're really leveraging all the assets that we have because of these robust sectors to develop those commodities, technologies, and materials that will define a low emissions economy. And that includes things like, CCUS, clean hydrogen, lithium for battery materials, bitumen beyond combustion, where we're taking the feedstock and not burning it, and even geothermal. It's really leveraging all the infrastructure, but also the human capital that we have here in our hydrocarbon sectors to really really start to create those industries that will be footholds in a net zero economy.
Now, in your study, you talk about a new narrative that's emerging around this. And this is something that, again, that we've done a lot of work on at Energy Media, is how we think and talk about hydrocarbons, particularly in Alberta. And I would agree with you. I think there is a new narrative emerging, and people are, but it's at very early stages. It's really hard because of the inertia and the size of the industry for people to wrap their heads around the fact that things have to change, things are changing, and it's actually better because there's more value in these hydrocarbons to make things and do other stuff with them than just refine them and burn them.
Absolutely. Most of the, even the opportunities that I flagged at the beginning of this conversation, most of those are projected to be multi-billion-dollar markets. But the reality is they're not going to happen on their own. But they are a huge opportunity that we feel you just can't miss right now. We're facing a moment. This next decade is going to be quite a defining moment for Alberta and Canada in particular in the energy transition. And so we can either be defined by that moment, or we can help define what this is going to look like for us going forward.
And again, another point made in your study is that we should acknowledge that environment and economics are not at odds. What do you mean by that?
Right now, when you think about the conversation around energy transition, it's a highly polarized conversation. On the one hand side, you have folks that, the views that business as usual is definitely not going to cut it for those trying to be relevant in the energy transition, especially when you think about oil and gas. On the other side of that debate, you have views that climate and commitments aren't going to have fundamental change in the sector. So this is about creating that radical middle opportunity that brings the environment side of that conversation together with the economics and says that clean growth can happen. And this is an opportunity that we can't miss as energy leaders right now in the current moment. And
again, your report says that we need to understand, Alberta needs to understand that the sector is an energy cluster in transition. And there seems to be this idea floating around Alberta that Alberta can somehow choose to be part of the energy transition, or it can choose not to be, and it seems to be that this is driven primarily around the view of climate change, and which is that climate change is not really a thing. It's kind of a hoax, or it's way overblown. And it's really, that's driven by policy, and policy is driven by politics. So if you just change the politics, you can make it all go away. And in fact, this is a fundamental restructuring of the global energy system driven by new technologies and capital and to some extent policies. Alberta doesn't get to opt out.
I agree. The signals are there. The signals are clear. We started this work right before the net zero commitments start to snowball, and then they start to snowball. Right now, you have over 137 countries across the world that have committed to net zero or carbon neutrality by 2050. The rules of the game are changing. The financial community weighed in really strongly at the beginning, saying these are the expectations. This is what we want to be able to invest in because this is where we see the risk shifting, we need to acknowledge that we're playing by a new game. Investors are looking for more, and we need a policy environment that can give that confidence to investors that projects launching in Alberta are aligning to these evolving expectations.
Right. And further to that point, there are two broad drivers of the energy transition, in my view. One of them is certainly policy, expectations, desire to decarbonize economies, and so we keep global warming at 1.5 C by the end of the century. That's one. The other is almost to extent independent of that, in that these new technologies now, like wind and solar and batteries and electric vehicles and on and on and on, are now the low cost option in the market. And so low and they're more efficient, and they bring other sorts of benefits with them. They have a higher value in addition to lower cost. That is, in my opinion, a primary driver of the transmission. And CapEx, capital is destiny. Where people are investing their money is where the economy is going, and they are investing in all of those new technologies, not the old ones.
Absolutely. And I think what we're arguing with this report is to say we can surge that with what we have here. We can start to advance those sectors that take advantage of renewables but are still attached to the hydrocarbon assets. It's a kind of a yes and narrative, if that makes sense. Right now, it's going to be a game of differentiation, no matter what, right? We're not just going to be evaluated against other oil and gas companies internationally. We're going to be evaluated against alternatives. Like, it's going to be, how do we differentiate ourselves as climate smart investments for those forward-looking investors?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to a comment you made earlier, which is that basically we've got a decade. And I absolutely agree with that. The window for acting is closing. It'll probably be mostly closed by 2030. And the reason for that, of course, is because of all the investment that's going on in these new technologies will be in place already at that point. And that gives, if Alberta doesn't act between now and then, its options for acting after 2030 will be circumscribed. There'll be far fewer options available to it.
It'll be hard. We have to gain a foothold in those emerging markets now. We have, and like part of it is this conversation around, oh, there's this lack of supply around oil and gas. We should be focusing on energy to meet that current demand. But the reality is, with our current infrastructure, we can do very little to do that. We really need to be focusing on how can we create a foothold in those low carbon markets that are starting to emerge, that can build that energy security that right now we're struggling around, that we can build those like kind of industries in a way that make a lot more sense given the geopolitics of what we're dealing with. So I 100% agree with you. The choices that we have, a decade is actually not that long. We're already at 2022. All projections right now for oil and gas say that by 2030, we're looking to at least plateau in terms of user demand. So even all things remaining, we're probably looking at significant disruption to those end use markets. So we have to start walking and chewing gum at the same time. We need to start thinking about what it means to, still be relevant today, but also start to be relevant in what we know the future is going to look like.
One of the, again, something your report argues for is considering policy in its broadest sense, advancing systems change via public policy. What do you mean by that?
When people think policy, they think legislation, regulation, etc. But government has, as part of its full toolkit, a number of levers that it can pull, from education to capacity supports to introducing new business models to helping design new investment models. It's all in the mix when we think about what we need to think about for supporting future-fit hydrocarbons. When you look at what's happening in Alberta and Canada right now, there's a lot of strategies and funding coming out to support specific technologies, and that's part of the picture. Identifying those technologies is critical and important, but it's not going to get us all the way there. Part of it is like, I've been playing with horrible sports analogies, so you'll have to pardon me, but like, we've probably backed the right players, but how to get more players playing the game, right? How do we open the door for more actors who already have a lot of expertise, infrastructure, and capital to move into those opportunities that we say will be the defining opportunities for Canada? And that's why this policy framework is really around enabling policy, policies that we can build can open the doors, especially to smaller and medium-sized players who may not have that depth in their ledger to fully start to diversify into those opportunities just yet.
Now, as a longtime observer and commenter on this process that we're talking about, I have to say that in the last 2 or 3 years, the Alberta oil and gas sector has begun to change. It's begun to accept the fact that there's a global energy transition, that it needs to, broaden its approach to adapting to that, and futurefit hydrocarbons would be part of that. What I would say though is that I don't think that it's nearly far enough down the road, the policy road, the adaptation road, where we're going to invest capital as it should be. It's behind. It's a laggard, not a leader in this. Would you agree or disagree?
I would think we've seen in the recent years, especially some really good leadership out of the leading companies in the energy sector. But I would agree, we're not as a sector sending strong enough signals that Alberta is part of the climate solution just yet. And part of this is there's a nuance when we say, why is this a policy problem versus a business problem only to solve? And for business, they're going to be strategizing around what's their best solution going forward over the next 10 years. Just be a pure resource company, keep doing what we're really good at, maybe start to diversify, maybe start to move into those low carbon opportunities. But when you take a step back, this is more a question around what is the future of the sector that Albertans want? What do we want this to look like? And that's why it's a policy conversation. And so this is around setting the policy environment that really reflects the future of the sector that we want to advance and how we want to leverage these rich resources that we have in a province like Alberta and a country like Canada.
That's a really good point, because we often forget that, in fact, the people own the resource. And under the Canadian Constitution, the people of Alberta own the resources within Alberta. So if, and I'll use the carbon fiber as an example. So Alberta Innovates, the provincial research agency, is developing this process to turn bitumen into carbon fiber. And they calculate that if you could get $30 for a barrel of oil from a refinery, if you turn it into carbon fiber and other products, that barrel is now worth $210 or $217. So if you're the owner of the resource and you're getting royalties on this, why would you say, yeah, I want that barrel to be sold for $30? No, you'd want to sell it for $217, because you get royalties and taxes and jobs and investment and all sorts of good things. And so the people of Alberta have the right, and they really have the self-interest to advance this conversation.
Absolutely. What I want is a province where people are coming back to Alberta. They see this as the place where innovators start up, where these new possibilities are, where you make this thrive. We are known for more than just kind of one commodity, a boom bust economy. We're diversified, we're attracting the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and I think we're starting to do that. We've got some really amazing, bubbles of amazingness. I'm gonna have to scratch this, Markham. Pockets of brilliance, even in our cities, and how they're advancing and trying to lead in the energy transition. I want to scale that across the province. That's my personal vision.
Well, Keren, it's a very interesting report. I would recommend that viewers go to the Energy Futures Labs website and download it, read it for themselves. There's a summary there they can read. Thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.